Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear listeners. I hope you are all doing well and finding a moment of peace in these increasingly turbulent times. Take a deep breath. We are living through a period where the cost of living, inflation, and global instability feel like a heavy weight on our shoulders. You've probably noticed the prices at your local store creeping up, or the news talking about trade wars as if they are just headlines. But today we need to look closer. We need to ask, what happens to your security when the very gates of our nation, our ports, begin to rust and fail? Before we dive into the dark reality of the Halifax ghost deal, I invite you to subscribe and turn on notifications. This is more than news. It's a survival guide for the new global economy. Your support allows us to continue bringing these deep analyses to light. This is the visual that is haunting the corridors of the Department of Transportation this morning. It is an image that no amount of political rhetoric or social media posts can erase if you look at the real time. Logistics trackers for the Port of New York and the massive terminals in Savannah, you will see a chilling trend emerging. It is a quiet, surgical strike against the American heartland. A $25 million deal signed in the quiet halls of Halifax, Canada, has just slammed the door on U.S. maritime dominance. They are calling it the ghost deal because on paper, the number seems small, a mere $25 million. But in the world of geoeconomic pivots, that $25 million is the spark that is melting the entire American logistics framework. While the headlines focus on the noise of the trade war, the real damage is happening at sea. The Teflon is melting, and the supply chains we've relied on for decades are being redirected north, leaving our ports to face a systemic risk we are not prepared for. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must first look at the paradox of the current administration's strategy. For years, the mantra has been one of isolation and strength, the belief that by tightening the borders and imposing tariffs, the American economy would become an impenetrable fortress. But the reality of 2025 is far more complex. The global economy is not a fortress. It is a fluid, living organism. When you block one artery, the blood simply finds another way to flow. Canada, often seen as the quiet neighbor to the north, has just executed a masterpiece of asymmetric economic warfare. By investing strategically in the Halifax Port, they haven't just expanded a dock. They have created a high-efficiency bypass that renders American tariffs irrelevant. Paul Krugman, a man who has spent decades analyzing the friction between politics and markets, is sounding the alarm. This isn't just about ships. It's about the systemic risk of a trade war that has become desperate. The desperation in the White House is palpable. Every new executive order aimed at protecting our ports seems to only accelerate the capital outflow. Logistics giants and multinational corporations aren't waiting for the trade war to end. They are voting with their feet, or rather with their hulls. They are moving their cargo to Halifax, where the digital infrastructure is faster, the labor relations are more stable, and the ghost deal ensures that their goods enter the North American market without the friction of the U.S. regulatory nightmare. This is the self-destructive mechanism of modern isolationism. In an attempt to seize control, the administration is losing it. We are watching the infrastructure of a superpower begin to decay in real time, not because of a foreign invasion, but because of a failure to understand the new global order. The term ghost deal was coined by analysts who noticed that while the world was watching the tariffs on Canadian timber and steel, a silent amendment was signed regarding the Port of Halifax. This amendment allows for a deep-water expansion that specifically targets ultra-large container vessels that currently struggle with the aging infrastructure of the U.S. East Coast. This is where the finance meets the pavement or the water. When a ship can't dock in Newark because of draft limitations or labor strikes, it heads north. And once that logistical habit is formed, the capital follows. We are seeing a massive geoeconomic pivot. The U.S. logistics sector represents trillions of dollars in velocity. Every hour a ship waits outside a California or New Jersey port, millions are bled from the American GDP. Canada's $25 million move acts as a lever, prying open the door for a new reality where the U.S. is no longer the primary gateway to its own continent. This is the invisible constraint Trump's administration is fighting. A war with 20th century tools, tariffs, and speeches, while Canada is playing a 21st century game of infrastructure dominance. The result is a systemic failure that starts at the docks and ends at your dinner table. When logistics melt, prices rise. When ports fail, the currency loses its utility. Krugman argues that we are witnessing the debt monetization of our own logistical decay. We are borrowing money to fight trade wars that are actively destroying the assets that back our national credit. It is a cycle of desperation that the ghost deal has accelerated beyond the point of no return. But why now? Why did the door slam so hard in Halifax just as the U.S. was posturing for a new trade victory? The answer lies in the fragility of the American supply chain. For decades, we ignored our ports. We allowed them to become bottlenecks, burdened by bureaucracy and outdated technology. Trump's desperate trade war acted as the final stress test that the system couldn't pass. When the administration threatened to close the border, they didn't realize that the world had already built a back door. Halifax is that back door. It is the new North American hub that doesn't care about Washington's tweets. The $25 million ghost deal funded the automation that American unions have fought against for years. Now, while U.S. ports are bogged down in litigation and labor disputes, Halifax is operating at 95% efficiency with 100% reliability. This is the structural failure that led to the logistics meltdown. Investors are pulling back from U.S. transport stocks. They see the writing on the wall, the logistics of the greatest economy on earth are melting because we tried to hold on too tight to a system that needed to evolve. The trade war wasn't a shield. It was a catalyst for our own obsolescence. As we watch the cargo volume in Halifax skyrocket by 40% in a single quarter, we have to face the cold reality. You cannot bully the ocean, and you cannot tariff a more efficient neighbor out of existence. This brings us to the human cost. We often talk about logistics as if it's just metal boxes and salt water, but it's actually the nervous system of your life. Every medication, every piece of technology, and every grain of imported food travels through this system. When the U.S. ports lose control, the American consumer loses security. The $25 million ghost deal in Canada is effectively a tax on every American citizen because the bypass through Halifax adds layers of cost and dependency on a foreign power. We are seeing the inevitable system decay that happens when a nation prioritizes political optics over structural integrity. The administration's desperate attempts to subsidize U.S. ports now are too little, too late. The capital has already migrated. The logistics companies have already signed 10-year leases in Nova Scotia. This is how empires begin to fray at the edges. It's not always a sudden crash. Sometimes it's just a slow, cold realization that the world has found a way to work without you. The trade war designed to bring jobs back is instead pushing the very foundation of our commerce into the hands of a competitor that was smarter, faster, and more strategic. The logistics are melting because they were built on the assumption of American exceptionalism, but the ghost deal proves that efficiency is the only exception the market cares about. Paul Krugman's analysis highlights a deeper, more terrifying trend: the new global order. In this order, regional players like Canada are no longer subservient to the American economic engine. They are becoming independent hubs that leverage global alliances to bypass U.S. influence. The Halifax expansion was quietly backed by international maritime conglomerates that are tired of the volatility in Washington. They want stability. They want a port that won't be shut down by a sudden executive order or a trade tantrum. By securing this $25 million deal, Canada has positioned itself as the adult in the room of North American logistics. The U.S. East Coast ports are now in a state of panic, begging for federal intervention that a cash-strapped government can barely afford. This is the paradox of power. The more the administration tries to exert dominance through conflict, the more the world organizes to exclude them. The logistics meltdown is a symptom of a larger disease: the loss of trust in the American system as a reliable partner. When the sheriff is unpredictable, the merchants find a new market. Halifax is that new market, and the door it slammed is the one that leads to the American century. As we look toward the future, the implications of this logistics shift are staggering. If Halifax becomes the primary gateway for the North American interior, the economic gravity of the entire continent shifts. We are talking about thousands of jobs, billions in tax revenue, and the strategic control of the most important trade route in the world. The U.S. is currently in a state of logistics paralysis. The trade war has created such a backlog of legal and financial hurdles that it is often easier for a company to ship to Halifax and truck the goods across the border than to deal with a U.S. port. This is the ultimate failure of the America First policy. It has made America the last choice for global shippers. The logistics are melting because the heat of the trade war has compromised the structural steel of our economy. We are seeing the successor to the American-led maritime system being born in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. It is a system that is digital, automated, and most importantly, indifferent to the political chaos of the United States. This is the new reality we must all prepare for. So where does this leave you? It leaves you in a world where you can no longer take for granted that the systems protecting your prosperity are functional. The Halifax ghost deal is a wake-up call. It's a reminder that while we argue about headlines, the real power moves are happening in the background, in the quiet docks and the digital ledgers of our neighbors. We must remain vigilant. We must look past the noise and understand the signals. The logistics of our nation are the foundation of our freedom, and right now that foundation is under siege. I want to thank you for staying with me through this deep dive. Your time is the most valuable asset you have, and I am honored that you spent it here. If this analysis opened your eyes, please share it with someone who needs to hear the truth. Like the video to help us fight the algorithm, and leave a comment below. Do you think the US can still save its ports, or is the Halifax pivot already set in stone? Stay safe, stay informed, and remember, in an economy of chaos, the only true hedge is knowledge. Good luck out there, and I will see you in the next deep dive.